Welcome to The Being Leader. I'm Annabelle Graham. Welcome to this episode of The Being Leader, the podcast that discusses how we need to show up and be as leaders, reflecting on what impacts our behaviours, our relationships and our outcomes, and allows us to focus more on our approach to leading ourselves, our teams and our organisations. Joining me again today is Preeta Cooley, who we last spoke to back in lockdown 1 about working well. So seeing as we were back in lockdown, we thought we'd repeat that experiment. Preeta is an executive coach and consultant who provides coaching support to executives across industry sectors who need to build different capabilities or mindsets to step up to a new challenge. Her work facilitates the kind of sustainable change in mindset and behaviours that accelerate performance and help people thrive. So Preeta, so good to have you back again to chew over another topic.
Thank you, Annabelle. I was delighted to receive your email inviting me to come back and have another conversation. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yours ended up being one of the most popular sessions that we did last year, and from a download point of view. So it seemed a really obvious choice to kick off the new year. So today we are going to explore choice. And literally this conversation could go anywhere. So I'll put that out there now. Because for me, it really, choice conjures up a very wide landscape to think about. And we were just reflecting that before we started thinking about this, we both went to the dictionary to think about actually what's that definition. So I came up with the one from Merriam-Webster, which describes choice as the opportunity or power to choose between two or more possibilities. So that opportunity or power to make a decision. So what does choice mean to you, Preeta?
Well, where shall I start? But I'll start with the definition that I took from the dictionary because I thought this was quite interesting. So a different choice of words that they've used, an act of choosing between two or more possibilities. And then underneath it said the choice between good and evil, so choice between. And similar words were offered as option, alternative, possibility, possible course of action, solution, answer, and way out. So that got me thinking that choice being such a wide subject, I have my own belief that choice comes through self-awareness. The more understanding we have about our own thoughts and feelings and what's driving them. So thinking of the Robert Dilts logical levels, what's below the iceberg. And it's all about our values, our identity and our beliefs. So I wonder if choice is all down to the beliefs that we have, whether they're conscious beliefs or unconscious beliefs, about how much power we have to choose. So based on Sartre's argument, there's no fixed morality of human nature to determine human action. And he believes believed, past tense, that humans have radical freedom. And this means that people have absolute power to choose how they will act in any given situation and in their lives as a whole. But I think probably as you and I know, Annabelle, that neuroscience has proved that 90%, 95% of our brain activity is beyond our conscious awareness. So there's those little gremlins, the unconscious, merrily at work. So meaning that just 5% of our cognitive activities, so the choices we make, the decisions that we take, the emotions that we have, the actions that we have, only 5% of it is conscious. So yeah, so for me, choice is all about our belief about choice.
And that's an interesting one. Because I think when we look at what makes people feel they don't have a choice, and we'll come to that, because that's another big question, that self-belief or that belief system is an absolutely key thing. And it's that piece about reality and illusion. So I also sat down to think about, what does choice mean to me? And I think there's a piece around the concept of free will. you know. So, and then I got into existentialism, which is a bit of a worry. But then I listened to a podcast called Modern Wisdom quite a bit, and the host of that, Chris Williamson's quite fond of a bit of existentialism. I mean, I've been listening to Does Consciousness Exist this morning. So, you know, that was my Monday morning depth, but well worth a listen if, you know, if that's something that's of interest. But, you know, because the existentialist philosophy says that there is a belief that we have free will, you know, no matter how small. But I think there's also, you know, and then the determinism side says that we can't have free will because all our decisions and outcomes are determined by a previous event, a cause, or a choice. So somebody else has done something. So we can't change the set of circumstances that we're in, but we can change what we do with them. You know, personally, I don't think it's as clear cut as that. I think there's probably a mix in there for me, because I absolutely agree with you. I think we do an awful lot of things on habit and routine because it's easy for us. You know, and sometimes we run with, oh, we're just going to conform to this, or we're just going to agree with that, and we're just going to stick in that habitual process that we've always done, because actually it serves us. You know, even though we might bitch and moan about something a little bit, actually it's okay. It's not bad enough, which is often why people don't change. Is it's not got bad enough yet, and I don't want something different enough yet. Therefore, I'll just stick with what I've got because it's easier. The bit for me is we always have the ability to do something different. And that's the bit that's important. We always have a choice, no matter what it is. It doesn't mean we're going to like the choice, and it doesn't mean we're going to like the options. You know, they might all be shit, but we do have a choice. And I suppose for me, that's that fundamental concept of, you know, free will. We've got the ability to do something different. You know, just because you've chosen not to doesn't mean you've got the ability or the freedom to bitch and moan about it. That was actually the option you took. So that's me being a bit controversial.
Well, no, I do agree with what you're saying, Annabelle. And yes, we can just be on autopilot. We can live our lives on autopilot, never really knowing why we're making the decisions that we're making, because we haven't stopped and taken that time out to actually investigate what's driving you know, the thoughts and the choices that we're making. And somebody asked me the other day about, well, how do we come up with our thoughts? And the little analogy that I used was when we go to turn a light switch on, we just hit the switch and the electricity turns the light on. But we don't stop and think about, well, how did that electricity actually get to be here to turn my spotlights on? And so it's the same with what's going on in the mind. If we have no idea what's actually driving what comes out at the end, so we have, you know, the unconscious level sort of quite often is identity and beliefs, and then coming through in that will drive our thought. And from the thought, we then have that option to pause and make a choice as to how we're going to respond to something. But quite often we're on autopilot and we go from thought to feeling and behaviour, not knowing where any of that's come from. So, but it's that, for me, it's that little juncture, choice comes in at that juncture when we've had the thought. And while I was sort of thinking and Googling about this subject, and a bit like you, I went all over the place, it was terribly random. But what came to mind as well was sort of, you know, Viktor Frankl, the Austrian neurologist, psychiatrist, philosopher, and author and Holocaust survivor. And his most well-known work, you know, Man's Search for Meaning. The quote that really resonates is, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we're challenged to change ourselves. And it is so, everything was about choice. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude to any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And that for me says it all. And then from there, sort of, I made the link to Carol Dweck, and her work on fixed mindset and growth mindset, and going through, how do we look at what choice do we make when we're faced with challenges, obstacles, effort and criticism, and also, the success of others. It's our choice as to how we frame it, how we look at it, then determines how much free will we have. So yeah, I don't know, how was that landing with you?
Oh, completely. Interestingly, I've gone to Frankl as well, because I think that is that piece around attitude. And there's a lovely little quote which I often use I use it in my leadership training, I use it with clients, and it comes from a guy called Jack Canfield, which sort of builds on that, which is E plus R equals O. Mm-hmm. So event plus reaction equals outcome. Mm-hmm. So, and actually that links back to that determinism theory of we can't change the event. Things are going to happen. If you get in the car to drive to wherever you're going and you get cut up by somebody, or somebody, drives into you, that you can't necessarily change. What's happened has happened, but we can absolutely change how we choose to respond. We can choose not to sit there and, F and blind at the person and swear at them and call them every name known to man. We can choose to be quite calm about it, and it will get us a different outcome. And I think this then comes into that piece around self-awareness, because I'm a big fan, and I don't know if you've read it, Steve Peters' Chimp Paradox.
Yes.
Yeah. A huge fan of the model, because it's dead easy. People get it. And it goes back to that, how difficult is it for us to be able to recognize that space between the automated response and choosing something different, is because we don't notice it. It's going so quickly, that autopilot, those bits that are programmed in the computer part of us, goes at 20 times the speed we think. It's so strong. And because the emotional limbic brain gets there faster, because it's 5 times stronger than the prefrontal cortex, which is the nice logical bit, which we think we're using all the time. And as you said, we are not. It's about 5%. It gets very tiring when you use the prefrontal cortex all the time. And I know a lot of the conversations I have around is getting some emotional control into how we work and operate as leaders. When I'm working with clients, it's getting them to think about, can you just start to notice when you're responding and how you're responding and what those triggers are that make you go off on the automatic racket or pattern that you play, and when do you not? Because that piece in that noticing is where we get the choice. And I'm a big fan of the growth mindset piece, because it is, but I don't think it's as clear cut. I don't think we're always fixed or growth. If we look at those two parallels, the difference between, if I think you said, do we learn from the successes of others? Oh yeah, but we're also still perfectly good at having the bitch of going, really? So I don't think it's that clear cut. I think we can sit on both camps. But again, it's that noticing and catching, when is this not serving me?
Yes, yeah, most definitely. And what was coming up for me as you were talking, and it is that noticing, the observation of ourselves. But as we know, life due to technology has, speeded up at a rapid rate. We've got 200,000-year-old brains that have never had a software upgrade, and suddenly they're not suddenly, but over the last decade, our minds have been expected to operate 24/7 without the natural rhythms of relaxation. And so this busyness, I wonder, or I have a strong belief that busyness causes people to not be able to sort of sustain attention. So, which means if they're not sustaining attention on anything that they're doing, they haven't got that space to actually do, any form of introspection. What's going on inside? What am I thinking, feeling, and behaving? What's coming up in my body? Oh my God, before you know it, I've reacted. I've not behaved in a way that's going to get me the outcome that I want, because they haven't necessarily got that space. And I mean, I've been meditating for several years now. I did an 8-week mindfulness program. That's 7 or 8 years ago. And at first people said, oh, how bizarre. Why are you doing that? You know, I think they all thought I was going to run off and join some sort of weird cult. But amazingly now, it's very, very mainstream. And so introducing practices that help us to slow down and help us to notice what's going on with regards to sort of, in our body, but also our mind, helps us to see when we are in, a high stakes situations where we need to behave in a certain way. And we need to be very conscious of the decisions, the choices that we're making. It gives us the capacity to do that. So, and I know you're a meditator too, aren't you, Annabelle?
Not so much meditate. I would say I do more moving. I'm better with yoga. But bizarrely, it was funny. I was reflecting this morning. I was doing a, I think as I said to you, I had to do a very slow yoga flow this morning because I needed to be wrung out physically. But actually, I know when I am concentrating in on that and making the breath work fit with the movement, that gives you that freedom and space. So I'm much better with the moving piece than the sitting down piece, I'll be honest. But again, actually, I think this is about finding what works for you. And there isn't a one size fits all. I remember having a couple of clients who actually, the yoga bit did help, but that wasn't the bit that calmed the brain. It was journaling. Yeah. Or it was a puzzle. So that journaling or drawing, it was something that got that focus, which is why, I was reading yesterday, no, it wasn't, it was on Radio 4, the craft has gone nuts again, because nobody can go out and everyone's bored of Netflix, but actually it quietens the mind. So if you're crocheting or embroidering or cross stitch, it's a very repetitive thing and it enables you to slow down and concentrate. So I think if people listening there are going, oh, do you know what, meditation's not my bag, it's a bit too woo. I can't sit there, contemplate my navel for 10 minutes. Well, it might not be 10, it could be 2. Or actually it could be just downloading your thoughts into a book so your wife or your partner or your husband or girlfriend or whoever doesn't get that crap because they don't need it. It's finding a way to download it. But I think there's something else that contributes to it. You're absolutely right about the speed. But I think it's also within that, and it absolutely links back to the technology piece you were talking about earlier, is if you think about, the days when you and I grew up, when if you were going to have a conversation, you'd have to either physically see somebody or ring them, so you spent, your evenings when you wanted to chat to your friend was sat on the stairs in the hall, 9 times out of 10, freezing your backside off because there was no radiator in there. It's either that or it's just me and the, child of the 70s. But that was what happened. So we had that time to be bored, to think about what we thought. Whereas actually with all of the social media that we have, so whether it be through Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or just through the way in which we communicate, so it could be through the podcasts that we listen to or what we watch, we end up living in an echo chamber, and an echo chamber that actually often reinforces a really enclosed view of things, so we don't get that wider viewpoint, and in some ways that can extrapolate and I think intensify what people are thinking and believing, and actually they don't get a different view, which can be so difficult because you don't have, instead of having the chance to notice, you just get a reinforcer, and that actually isn't helpful.
When you were talking, what was coming up for me was going back to that word choice, because we do seem to live in a world, we're performing in a world of too much and immediacy. We're bombarded. But as far as I'm concerned, and you'll know from our conversations about my ideas for manifesto for a good working life, as far as I'm concerned, busyness isn't an inevitable consequence of modern life. I'm thinking about senior leaders that I've worked with client-wise, when they come to me, I've had some that are absolutely exhausted, and I'll say, well, how many hours are you working? And this is very much for follow the sun global organizations. And I'll never forget, there was one senior leader who said to me, well, have meetings that can start at 5 a.m. with India, and then I could be asked to attend meetings 10 o'clock at night. And you know, it was like, so why are you choosing to do that? Oh, but I don't have a choice. Everybody has a choice. So it goes, choice in those sort of, in that sort of scenario is all down to determining boundaries. And also thinking about, what do I need to be able to take for myself to perform incredibly effectively in my role? And, you know, just after a couple of sessions, once we'd sort of worked out what was important to this particular individual, and they've got a routine for getting up, doing some form of exercising, planning, and reviewing before meetings, so review and plan, and actually setting in stone start and finish times that could, wave slightly, but with a caveat that something else needed to give somewhere else. The individual said, oh my God, I feel so great, first of all. And I said, and how do you know, what about your performance level? Oh my God, I am getting through so much work and I'm so much more effective. I'm not just dragging myself from meeting to meeting and then thinking, oh God, when am I ever going to get anything done? Because I have chosen how I'm going to work and what works for me. So
I absolutely concur with that. And I think we see it a lot. And I think it's got worse over the last 12 months.
Yes.
But it's absolutely, there's a challenge, I think, especially when we have people in global roles, that you do have these downsides and you've got to work out where that piece is and where you get that time. And I think we get this worry that flexible working means we've got to always be there, and it actually drives a presenteeism piece, especially when it's remote. And I can absolutely, empathize with those comments, that if I think about lots of the clients and the delegates I work with over the last 12 months have gone, well, it's just madness. I'm back-to-back Teams meetings all of the time. And they find it a bit odd when I borrow a phrase from a speaker colleague I work with, who just goes, well, your diary's your fault, so why have you said yes to it? And they sort of look at you as if to go, it's a bit rude. It's like, well, you accepted it. Well, I can't say no. Yeah, you can. And actually, I think there's this challenge around choice and an expectations conversation about going back to, you know, our boss or the stakeholder or the customer, because, oh God, we can't say no to the customer. Bollocks. Of course you can say no to the customer. They're human. If you go back and say, I'm really sorry, I've got a prior meeting with somebody else. You know, so for me, one of my a value that's really important to me is commitment. So I don't cancel meetings unless I really don't have to. I mean, I can count on one hand, I think, how many I've cancelled over the last 12 months. I just don't do it. I'm very chilled if people cancel me. That doesn't bother me. But what it means is when someone comes in and says, oh, can you just stick a meeting in on that day? And I go, I've got prior commitment. And occasionally somebody will go, can you just change it? Very easy for me to say no. Who says you're more important than they are? That's ridiculous. And that concept, I think, of understanding boundary and having that agreement is so crucial, especially now when we've done the thing that nobody thought, which we've moved to remote working. And guess what? Businesses have carried on and thrived and it's all been fine. But unfortunately, what we haven't done is chosen to change the way in which we run our meetings in between. So we've just replicated 9 to 5 working and dumped it online. And we're gradually killing our workforce who need time, you know, and that's the challenge. It's saying, let's think about how we're now choosing to run our day. And if for you, I mean, we were talking earlier about my neighbour who's got two kids. His wife's a teacher, so she's still in work. He's got 2 under 11s who are homeschooling, and he's working from home. Who's gone, actually, do you know what? Let's just get most of it done between 7 and 9, because then I can concentrate on getting these guys set up. And it's being flexible and choosing how we choose to work.
Yes, yeah. And it is, I so concur with you with the sort of, people thinking, well, surely, that's just the way it is. But it isn't. And I think that takes us back to self-awareness, this understanding sort of our own model of reality, which, based in our own minds, about how we see ourselves, how we see the world, and how we see other people. And because our models are totally unique and they're based on our personal experience very much from our formative years, if, for instance, somebody grew up in a family system where, it was sort of anyone senior to us in that work world was very much revered and expected and, respected, and we did exactly what that person told us, then, the individual will probably never, ever question that until perhaps they get the opportunity to work with a coach or do some work themselves, to raise that level of self-awareness. How is that belief serving me now? In the present climate, my present role, what might be a more healthier way of looking at this? And also, how can I then go about getting what I want and need, and still be able to sort of, work incredibly effectively? Because I think at the moment, I wonder how many people are being really effective in their roles, because, no one can work under exhaustion. We know that Denmark has, one of the highest productivity rates in Europe, but has, one of the lowest in number of working hours. So somehow they still produce an awful lot, but they're not doing it tied to their desks all day, every day. Life is important. And going back to that idea of, crafting or baking or painting, or we need all these other areas of our lives to actually support us and nourish us. If it's, all work makes Jack a dull boy, I think is the saying, isn't it, from decades and decades ago. But yeah, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if that piece that you said, it's that, why do people sometimes feel that they don't have a choice? And it can be that dominance dynamic. Whether it comes from a paternalistic, story that we tell ourselves, whether it's, oh, well, someone's senior, therefore they must know more, therefore I must say yes, or whether it's the boss always speaking first. All of these things. In the worst stage, it's bullying, restriction, but equally that feeling of, I have no choice, I am compelled. We end up with people who, and I think it comes, if I think about the impact that this shows up on with people and the challenges that I know I find, is people don't necessarily see the options they have, because we've got blinkered, because we've either had the echo chamber, or everyone's feeling the same way, or we've constantly tried the same thing, but they're all just variations of the same thing. We haven't sussed that. Then we can't see alternative perspectives. We can't see that reframing that's so important from us, which we do in coaching. They don't sometimes know any different. There's a lack of knowledge or awareness. Not saying that person is any less intelligent than another. It's just not within their experience sphere. And that ends up with things that are, they're overwhelmed, or it goes back to the bit where I said before, people don't, the choices they see are just so unattractive. Therefore, they feel they have no choice.
Yeah. Yes. And as you said that, what came up for me was going back to something else that you said, which was the stories we have in our head. So it depends on the story, after we've had that thought, this is what I want to do. Oh, no, I can't because, and then we could come up with a very negative story. And because the conscious mind is there to sort of protect us, it's the survivalist element of us, we're more likely to come up with negative connotations as to, well, if I did say to my boss, could we do this and this instead? But I suppose, to an extent, perhaps it's more about the degree of power we believe we have within ourselves, as opposed to sort of placing power and often responsibility in the hands of others. So going back to that, what we were talking about earlier about, being comfortable and in our comfort zone, if we abdicate responsibility and say, well, it's not up to me, it's all happening because of, you know, so and so, or this circumstance, or that particular person within the organization, then we're literally giving away our power. But the more responsibility we're prepared to take for ourselves, you know, for how we think, how we feel, how we behave, and the possible consequences of that, the greater the degree of freedom that we have, not only within our working life, but sort of life in general.
That, though, takes me back to your Frankl quote, though, that if we stop blaming other people, that means the only people who's down to blame is us. And that's the hard bit, because that means, you know, if you've done deflecting and you know, you are forced to no longer blame it on, you know, the circumstances, the organization, your boss, your team, or whatever it may be. If you've actually got to hold the mirror up and look at yourself, that means actually then we've got to do something different. And sometimes that is too difficult, or is such a choice that actually, and I think it goes back to that. The other option is too big. So I found a lovely little RSA Animate talk by Renata Salaci, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that's right. But what she said is, you know, choice always brings a loss. So in that piece about choosing to do something different, or knowing that actually we've got to change ourselves, that means we've got to give something up. And that might just be the status quo, or the circumstances that exist currently. And actually, they might be helping, they might be serving something that still has worth to me. Therefore that then becomes my challenge that can paralyze me, of going, actually, if I change this, the implication of my choice is either means I lose something which is equally still important to me, or it's so big that's something which I don't want to contemplate. I think that can come up and cause problems as well.
Yes, yeah, I hear what you're saying. And what came up for me was that, you know, what are we motivated by? You know, are we motivated by fear or desire? So perhaps it's that balance, the risk taking, of the desire of having something different that could be so much better, or the fear of disrupting the status quo. But I, in my experience, I've noticed that people, when they realize that they want some sort of change, but they're abdicating responsibility, quite often it's down to a fear of having the conversation, or, you know, whatever it might be. But it is often that fear of having difficult conversations, because we all want to be thought, you know, people want to be thought of as nice, and quite often what I've experienced is people actually saying, I don't know how to go about having this conversation. So there is always choice, because being able to actually articulate what it is that's stopping you making the choice that you feel will be better for you, gives you a way of, or working with somebody would, you know, whether it be a friend or a colleague or a coach, would give you a way to actually come up with, going back to what choice is, choosing between two or more possibilities, or the power to choose. So I wonder sometimes if it's getting over that hurdle of identifying what it is that's stopping us making a choice that we feel might actually be better for us, and then actually having the wherewithal, knowing what to do to actually, that's going to help you get the result that you want.
I think that definitely is the case. I mean, I know I spend a lot of time with organisations. I don't think I know a programme where I haven't got difficult conversation frameworks that in there. It just happens without fail every single time, because people hate it. You know,
yeah.
I don't want to do that, because then you're going to feel bad, I'm going to feel bad, therefore I just don't have the conversation. At the same time, I think there's also another aspect of that. You know, you were saying earlier, we're really good at thinking about what can happen. So our inner critic is brilliant at catastrophizing. And And I think we create so many stories around what will happen if I have this conversation, all of which are usually quite cataclysmic. And actually, sometimes they could be. You know, sometimes, and it goes back to do I want it enough? Is it bad enough? You know, if I think back, and this is quite an extreme example, but one which, you know, many people may recognize. You know, if I think back 20 odd years ago, and I won't go into the details surrounding it because there's somebody else in that relationship and they don't deserve to have it plastered over a podcast. But I walked out of my then marriage. I had no job. I had nowhere to live. I had to change countries and I had no money. That's not a decision that came lightly. And it sat, and for years I ignored it. Because actually the decision has so many ramifications that the impact of making that choice, it's got to be either bad enough or I've got to want it enough. You know, so, and I thought, you know, that's why people don't leave marriages. That's why they stay in them for years, is because it's the status quo is easier to maintain than to make the decision. And you know what? Actually, it was probably the best thing I ever did, because I came out, you know, you go, well, you know, nothing can be quite as bad as that. So it doesn't really matter any choice I make because it'll be fine. But that can, I think, you know, when people are in, you know, maybe working in an organization where they hate it and it's having an impact on their health, you know, that they're stressed, or they're working for a boss who's a bully, or whatever it may be. That's why people don't walk away from that, because if I give up my job, then what happens? You know, so I think we can absolutely, you know, have that awareness around a difficult conversation, but sometimes the choice is so big and the impact so major that actually we just put up with it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you were very brave taking that leap of faith. And the reason why I say faith is because both fear and faith make you believe in something that you can't see.
Absolutely.
And it's what we choose. Do we choose to have, going back to choice, do we choose to have faith that, okay, I'm going to do this and everything will work out okay? Or do we look at fear, or I call it fear casting? You know, we create these great, as you said, you know, catastrophes. We catastrophize. And yeah, I think it is something that comes to all of us. And I think of the decisions that I've made in my life as well. Some of them incredibly random, and I look back and think, gosh, why? But I think sometimes life has a way of like interrupting or sort of creating a catalyst sometimes, if people are in that situation of believing that it would be good for them to make a decision, but they don't. Then sometimes something can happen. You know, somebody working in a company might have wanted to leave and then hear that they're going to be made redundant, and first thought is, oh God, how's that going to be? What am I going to do? You know, pay my mortgage. But then they find that it gives them the opportunity to go on and do something that they really enjoy, or find a role that's perfectly suited, you know, that's really suited to them, where they're using their strengths and their skills, and where they're, you know, they really feel that they're making a difference. So, and I've spoken to lots of people that have had that sort of journey where, oh God, I thought it was going to be awful, but actually, like you said, you know, it was the best thing I ever did. So,
and I think I can absolutely concur with that piece around redundancy. I think it's a brilliant example, because I mean, I've done redundancy I've been made redundant 3 times. I think equally like you, worked with so many people through it. I've made so many people redundant, which isn't a great thing, but fact of life, but also worked with people who are in that situation. And I think there's 2 things for me about redundancy is often we don't see that it can be suitably positive. And I think 9 times out of 10, it nearly always is. You know, it nearly always is, if you can get a reframe, if you can also get enough distance. If you're in that lucky situation where you get enough money that you can get a bit of space before you get another job. Otherwise, I do think we end up in an ejector seat role. And I remember once I very much definitely, because I'd already got the job before I got made redundant, just hadn't told anyone. And I ended up in an ejector seat role because I'd got a job which probably wasn't the right one when I got it, because I was annoyed with where I was, and then luckily got a redundancy out of it. But I think if we can get enough space, we're able to reframe. But equally, there is a piece around loss of identity.
Mm-hmm.
I think that comes out, and that's what can be the most, is because we grieve for the role, we grieve for who we've, maybe for the friendships that we have, for the situation that we were in, and that can be a real powerful one.
Yes, loss is a great thing to all of us to have to, work through and process. But as you say, having that space gives the opportunity for that to happen. And I wonder if it then is about, and I wonder if we've gone off track here, because
really, we're off fine.
Where I was going with this was how we make, under what situation are we choosing? So are we choosing while we're feeling really anxious? And from that fear-based model, oh God, it's a knee-jerk reaction, I've got to get a job, this is what I'm going to do. So we don't give it any thought, we don't give it any space. Or do we look at it from a place of, well, okay, I notice and observe that I'm feeling really stressed and anxious about this. So I'm just going to chill out for a bit, and then I'm going to sit down calmly. So again, it's that choice, which goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the noticing how we're thinking and feeling, and the just general observation of ourselves. We're so focused on what's happening on the outside world, and so many people are focused on what's going on their phone. We seem to be losing the connection with ourselves, which is where everything sort of, starts and finishes, really.
Absolutely. And it goes back, as you were saying earlier, around that value system.
Mm.
Because it's about reassessing, who am I? What do I want to be? How do I want to be seen?
Yeah.
Which requires a bit of thinking and a bit of space. And that may be harder for some people than others. So if you think about, obviously you and I end up working with people who have chosen to have a thinking partnership with somebody.
Yes.
Whether that be in a developmental, for me, in that developmental workshop piece where you're getting people to think differently through concept, or in a coaching conversation, which really is, us acting as a thought provoker. How do we go about either empowering ourselves or empowering others to think differently around choice?
Yes. There was, I just want to take back to that thinking thing, because there was a great quote that popped into my head. So I'll just quickly share it and then I'll answer your question, if that's all right, Annabelle. And it's Henry Ford: if you think you can or if you think you can't, you're right. So it is all about how we think about something. But going back to this, how do we empower people? A lot of my work is around enabling people to become more self-aware. So going back to that, because I'm fascinated by the impact that self-knowledge has on the choices that we make and on our capacity to make effective decisions and communicate successfully and build better relationships. So a lot of the work that we do within the coaching space is to enable them to form insight, because from insight one gets awareness, and from awareness brings choice, because we're not going to react on autopilot. We have that ability to stop and recognize so we can respond. So that's what came up for me when we were thinking about how do we enable ourselves and others. And I think from there, once we have choice, we tend to start to take more responsibility. we're not on autopilot, we're not abdicating responsibility, which gives us a greater degree of motivation, and motivation usually then forms action, and I'm all about action sometimes, which gives us achievement and performance and results, which is, you know, what we're all aiming for. So it's the more insight and awareness we have, the more choice we have in any given situation.
I think it also brings back control, which is so, so helpful for people, is we feel that we are in control because it's not being done to us. We're making the choice to do something. And I think that can have a huge impact on people.
Yeah, I'm smiling there, the word control. I wonder if we actually have control over anything. I wonder if we're in charge of it, are in charge of what we're doing. Rather than actually controlling it. So, yeah.
Back into the existentialist sphere there, Preeta. We could restart. Do I need to do another one on control and just have an entirely conversation about that?
Oh my God, yeah.
Well, should we save that for lockdown 4?
Yeah. Oh God, no, we don't want another lockdown, surely. I'm dancing on my own in the kitchen, you know.
But, you know, when I thought about it, I thought, actually, I think whether it be our role as a coach or whether it be us as individuals, I think it's about finding possibilities and opening our eyes to different possibilities. And that sometimes means getting out the echo chamber, you know, maybe not talking to the same friends who are reinforcing the stories, or, you know, it's getting a different viewpoint, because I think we struggle sometimes with that diversity, which then throws another challenge in, maybe from the coaching point of view, because, you know, obviously when we all get trained in most of the phases, it's about being non-directive, and sometimes this awareness that everyone's got the ideas, but actually if we're sat in that zone where we can't see the options, we sort of need someone to give us some extra ones, because actually I'm a big fan of doing this sometimes in sessions when people aren't coming up with enough ideas, because actually there's a couple of things going on there. There's a blocker. There's either a lack of knowledge, or they just can't see it, or they just need a reframe. And it's not about me saying, well, I think you need to go and do this, you know, if we're staying in that non-directive mode. But it doesn't mean I can't throw another 6 things into the bag and go, here you go, this is what's coming up for me and I'm thinking of. Now, what do you think of all of that stuff? Because actually it just makes the pool of choice bigger. And I think that sometimes can be really useful for people, is just alternatives. If I think about the amount of times people have gone, oh, I'd never thought of that, or I didn't see it that way. And that's where that diversity of thought outside the echo chamber is so useful. And it's not new, it's not amazing, it's not somebody's, you know, amazing bright idea. It's just one other person's day-to-day is somebody else's newness. And I think that can be a really useful way of thinking about it.
Yes. And as you were speaking, what came up for me was thinking about diversity of thought, and how in organizations there's this sort of, you know, people like me, PLR, is it? Yeah, people like me. So some organizations like to have a set of people that are all from a similar background, you know. So modes of thought are very, very similar. And you get that group think, whereas allowing diversity of thought, or encouraging and saying, you know, we have difference within this organization, we have great difference within this, you know, within our team, within our meeting. And, you know, the greater the range of thoughts, the better, because we're going to have so much more to play with. So it's exactly as you were saying on a one-to-one with a coachee. It's perhaps how do we empower organizations to ensure that they're looking at all the choices that they have available to them, by bringing in acknowledging and also honouring the diversity of thought, as opposed to, well, no, we just don't do it like that around here, or no, we don't think like that. We couldn't possibly do that. So, and this is what everybody needs at the moment. It's how can we do things differently that are going to be more effective. So, as you say, the more choices we have, the more that's on the table or in the bag to be chosen from, then the better.
So I'm just thinking about the themes that we've talked through today, and I've scribbled a few down to just sort of draw us to a close. And I think if I've missed any, shout. So I think one of the fundamental pieces around that self-awareness that you raised really early doors. So that noticing, understanding what's going on for me, understanding when I make certain choices, when I don't, and actually what's the story that I'm telling myself. Definitely it's about recognizing possibility and getting out the echo chamber and getting that diversity of thought in. What else would you say is really important for us to make sure that we have?
I think the other thing is, if we want to put ourselves in the best position to make great choices, then it is, how do we create space in our lives to be able to notice what's going on inside, and to actually think. And it is some sort of investigation as to sort of, the patterns of thinking, feeling and behaving that are, what's driving our choices. Because if we have no idea what our values are, or where our beliefs, even that something is a belief, we just think it's a given, and have no capacity to change it or to think differently unless we've investigated it. So
great shout. So that leaves us with 3 messages from today.
Yeah, great.
Which is find space.
Yes.
Find space and time to notice and reflect. Tap into that self-awareness and understand what's going on for me, and notice our thoughts, our choices, our responses, and explore possibility.
Yeah. And on the explore possibilities, I'd just like to add that sometimes we think there's only one possible way, but if we sit and think about it, or ask, ask 6 people, and they'd all come up with something different. So, remember that it's just because we thought of one thing doesn't mean that that's the only thing. I think we can all be guilty of falling in that trap, can't we?
Absolutely. Yeah, daily. Brilliant. Well, look, thank you for joining me on this exploration of choice, which has taken us, from the existentialist theory to normality and time management of diaries, which who knew when we first started. It's been lovely having you on again. Thanks, Preeta.
Oh, absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, Annabelle. Anytime.
Thanks for listening to The Being Leader.